What's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel, the best place for youth and parents to learn more about education and soft skills. Now, one of the hardest things for parents and youth to deal with is when something happens that's inexplicable to the parents and the parents ask the youth, why did you do this? And that's actually a very tough question to answer, even for adults. When you ask someone, why did you do something? They have to think for a little bit. It's like, oh, because this 1, 2, and 3, right? The reason why questions are more difficult to answer is because it requires a lot of critical and analytical thinking, a lot of abstract thinking that deals with why did something happen. So sometimes when people do things, they don't really think about why beforehand. So the better way to ask this is use those questions leading with what. And the reason for that is because people think in what. So a quick example would be, if you think about the words that humans have in their vocabulary, it's usually nouns. Across all languages, nouns dominate the vocabulary we use, much more than verbs, and especially much more than abstract terms. So instead of asking why questions, today I'm going to give you some questions to help you coach your youth. So this video would especially apply to parents and educators, but if you are a youth, these are good things to also think about as well. So historically, Socratic questioning is a method that has helped people think things through logically. And of course, this methodology is named after Socrates, the famous Greek philosopher, who many attribute to be the founder of modern reasoning. And he's also known to be the founder of the intellectual lineage that led to Plato and Aristotle as well. So without further ado, today I'm going to give you some of the questions in Socratic reasoning to help people think more logically and think with more clarity. Now, the purpose of Socratic reasoning is to help people uncover the assumptions that underlie what they think and what they do. So in a sense, it's an intervention to cut into the automatic thoughts that people have when they go through their thinking, right? So when people automatically jump to a certain assumption, that's when this is especially useful. Have you thought this through? So the first step to take is to reveal the issue, right? What is the evidence that supports this idea, and what is the evidence that goes against this idea? So by asking this question, you look at the evidence, you lay it all on the table, and notice these are what questions, right? So it's about what supports and what's against. So essentially, when you ask the question, what evidence is for it, what evidence is against it, you basically have a Hegelian dialectic process. And what that is it's a mouthful. So what is the result is you present a thesis, and then you present an antithesis or an antithesis, and then through the process, what you create is synthesis. And the synthesis gives rise to new ideas that you may not have previously considered. So when you are coaching your youth, that's one very effective method to use. The second step to the Socratic questioning process is asking what are conceivable alternative explanations. So for example, asking the question, what might be another reason or viewpoint that led to this conclusion? Or why else did something happen, right? So by asking this question, you coach the youth to start considering other alternatives to a situation. As NBA coach Dwayne Casey says, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so by asking this question, you consider alternative explanations to certain things. The third set of questions as part of the Socratic reasoning process is asking the question which examines potential outcomes. So for example, what are the worst outcomes? What's the best outcome? What's the most bearable outcome? And what's the most realistic outcome? For example, if the youth is stressed about a project and they're procrastinating, which is a common thing because procrastination is essentially the fight or flight syndrome being hijacked and people refusing to take action because number one, either out of fear, or number two, the fear of the potential of achieving something great. So whenever a youth drag their feet, it's probably because one or the other case, right? Or maybe you just don't want to do it. That's the third one. But I remember when I was a kid, there was a project that I was super excited about doing, which is a robot project. I was in grade 4, and Mr. Adams told us to create a robot that can live on Mars to do certain things and pretty much survive and explore Mars. And I was super excited about the idea. Even to this day, I still remember that I was so excited about the idea that I dragged my feet on the project and that I never submitted the project. And even after like several weeks, and Mr. Adams told me like, hey John, you can still submit the project, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm super excited still. And I was so excited that I never got around to it. And to this day, I still remember Mr. Adams, I still remember the project, I still remember I didn't do it because I was simply too excited for it, right? By evaluating these kind of outcomes, it really helps the youth consider, work through their fear, work through their excitement, and look at the outcomes, right? And also, it's important to know that the fight or flight syndrome is actually controlled in the amygdala, which is the older region of your brain. So whenever you're excited and whenever you're afraid, and it's basically at the same spot. So a very simple exercise of closing your eyes to do some visualization would help. It's like, if you tell your youth to close their eyes and just imagine, can you imagine the outcome if you totally killed it on this project, right? Or can you imagine the outcome if you totally killed it on this XYZ, whatever it is, perhaps a competition, perhaps whatever, right? And yeah, that excitement can turn into motivation. So working through this through the Socratic process would help as well. The fourth thing to ask in the Socratic questioning process that will help your youth is to help them evaluate the consequences, right? What's the effect of thinking or perceiving something that way? What could be the effect of thinking differently or no longer holding on to this belief? So once again, it taps into the potential. What is holding you back? What can drive you forward? And what's the consequences of holding certain false beliefs that may be crippling or that may create really negative outcomes for the individual? So evaluating the consequences, once again, helps a lot. And the fifth and last thing that is in the Socratic questioning process is distancing, right? Because distance creates more objectivity. And of course we know that absolute objectivity is pretty much not possible, but creating distance allows you to evaluate something critically as long as it's not involved. So the question to ask for this is, imagine a family or a friend that is in the same situation, or if they viewed the situation this way, then what would you tell them, right? So what would the youth give advice to another youth? And as people know, we tend to get in our own way. And so by creating a distance that creates objectivity, it helps people critically evaluate different things and different possible outcomes. So careful use of the Socratic method really enables people to challenge recurring or isolated thoughts that are just vicious cycles and vicious patterns, and start basically reprogramming the brain so that the logical center in the prefrontal cortex can control the emotional centers that are, like I said before, in the amygdala and the older regions of the brain. And through this process, you can help youth break out of vicious cycles of thinking, of perception, of pretty much a lot of things. And especially a lot of times these fears are isolated and they're illogical and they don't really make sense. And so by creating this open dialogue through the Socratic questioning process, it breaks out of the illogical thinking and also the fallacious internal logic that a lot of people can get hung up on. And if you haven't realized already, not only are these questions good for youth, it's pretty much good for anybody, right? As long as they're old enough to critically evaluate and really use their logical thinking. So young children, probably not so ready for these kind of questions, but you know, who knows? Every kid's different. Some young children are ready for these kinds of questions. And so if you like this video, click that like, hit the subscribe button, share it, and leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Take care.